There will be a lot of topics that talk about the present and the future later today. And so I thought I'd give us an easy start and talk a bit about history and the journey from cryptography to crypto. And now cryptography itself is not a particularly old subject. Until like 50 years ago, it only existed in the obscure realms of military and secret services and other governance agencies. And things really started like in the mid to late 70s, when Merkel and Diffie and Hellman wrote their papers introducing public key cryptography. And then a few years later, we had the RSA crypto systems. They're still in use even today. And so I want to take some time and talk about a few topics. So back in those days, so those papers kind of started a Cambrian explosion, and many topics, not only public key cryptography, also things like zero knowledge proofs and multi-party computation, they were all conceptually introduced in the next like 15 to 20 years. And so I want to talk a bit about three particular topics here. The first one is electronic cash, or e-cash. It was introduced in 1982 by David Chaum. And so the setting that was considered in those days worked as follows. There's a centralized issuer here, often referred to as the bank, that obviously would issue tokens. And clients of that bank, here users, would get those tokens from the bank. They would spend them to merchants, and the merchants could redeem the tokens with the bank. Now, these schemes were pretty peculiar in some ways. For example, the merchant wouldn't be able to spend those tokens again. The only thing they could be doing is redeeming them at the bank. And what these schemes really thought was important or focused on was the spending phase, making this private, making this work as much as possible without any interaction with the bank, and so on and so forth. Now, many cryptographers, including Jan, have been working on this topic over the years, but it never really caught on in practice. And I'm not really sure why that is. To some extent, I think it's because the model is kind of weird. Everyone has to be a client of the same bank, otherwise this doesn't really work at all. And also, like back in those days, we were not all casually carrying a pretty good computer in our pockets, right? So may also have been technical reasons to some extent. A second area I want to highlight is threshold cryptography. So that was introduced by Desmet and Frankel in 1989, so it's also already quite old. And the core idea is that for a cryptographic scheme, you have some kind of a cryptographic key, and then you kind of mathematically slice that key into pieces, and you give one piece to each one of a group of people or nodes or whatever. And the core idea or the core invention here is that these people can now together compute the cryptographic function without ever reassembling the key. So the key will always stay separate. They will just do computation based on the local slice of the key that they see, but still together they will be able to compute the function. And so the security here is that define some threshold t smaller than the number n of overall participants. For any t larger than n, you will be able for any value larger than t, you will be able to compute the function. So if you have enough people, you will be able to compute. If you have less than t people, there's nothing you can do. Like those people will not learn anything about the key or the functions you could be computing on that key. A third area is consensus protocols. I mean, that you obviously know about today, but it was introduced also in the late 80s, early 90s. The most influential paper was by Leslie Lampert, introducing a protocol called Paxos, a term that you may also still come across today. And back in those days, those consensus protocols worked on a fixed set of nodes. So in the beginning of the protocol, you have to fix one set of nodes, and those nodes together can then, given values that they have, decide on one particular value that they all want to continue with. And so there's different variants of those protocols. Some are secure only against nodes that may either be alive or dead, and others may be able to work with fully malicious nodes that do arbitrary actions in the protocol. This one actually did get some traction in a specific realm. So if you look at large compute services, failure-resilient computation, then the variant that is resilient against individual failures of nodes actually did get some practical tractions, even pre-blockchain. So then let's fast forward to 2009, where things really changed with obviously with Bitcoin. So Satoshi Nakamoto wrote this beautiful Bitcoin white paper and gave a nice implementation of the protocol as well. And I think if I look at Bitcoin from the perspective of the previous slides I gave you, I think Satoshi did two major innovations here. And the first one was he devised a consensus protocol that is entirely permissionless. So nodes can join and leave the network at any point in time without the necessity of coordinating this in any way with all the other parties. And if you compare this with the setting I described before, where everyone has to agree on a fixed set of nodes and that set will be the same forever, that's a very huge difference, right? So in terms of practical deployment, this changes a lot. And the second one was that he basically decentralized the role of the issuer in the eCash scheme. And so he made the network itself the issuer of the tokens, used also the tokens to incentivize participation in the network. And so that's kind of the core invention over the existing eCash schemes. Now, in terms of privacy, Bitcoin is much more trivial than even the early eCash schemes I mentioned. So there's still a lot to be done. And of course, over the next couple of years, or over the next now 15 years, we know a lot of things have happened there. And I don't want to get too much into everything that happened in the blockchain space thereafter, but I still want to quickly jump forward to 2021 and link back to the third topic I mentioned, because the Internet Computer Protocol is fundamentally built on threshold cryptography. As you saw, it's also one of the topics that existed for a long time. And threshold cryptography is vital for many of the great properties of ICP. For example, the unlimited scalability by just adding new subnets is fundamentally driven by threshold cryptography. The capability of resource-constrained devices to validate outputs of the blockchain is fundamentally driven by threshold cryptography. And of course, all the assets on other blockchains that can be controlled and held by canisters on the Internet computer, this functionality is also fundamentally driven by threshold cryptography. Of course, there's lots of other innovations that together form the entire Internet Computer Protocol, and I'm sure you hear a lot about those today. But actually, I think this session will continue with the topic of threshold cryptography and what you can do with it. And so with this, I'll hand it back to Jan. Thank you all for listening, and have a great third anniversary of the Internet Computer Protocol.